So it's that time of year again where people take off their road shoes and start reaching towards something similar to a Lake winter road boot. And in this video, I'm going to be comparing the Lake MX146 and the Lake MXZ304. The 146 is the sort of thing that I would like to take out on a Saturday morning, maybe for 2 to 3 hours, maybe a little bit of harder riding thrown in there as well. And the boot certainly lends itself well to that. The 304 is a bit more of a heavyweight. It's bigger, it's got more volume, it's more insulated. And in that sense, it's also a heavier boot. This boot is 750 grams in a size 43, whereas the 146 with the same Shimano SBD cleat is 550 grams. So that's quite a big difference in weight when you compare both boots. I've ridden this boot in temperatures approaching 2 degrees Celsius, raining the whole time, and as I'm coming back in without a front mudguard from a 2 to 3 hour ride, I'm maybe beginning to get a tiny little bit of wet on my foot somewhere. It's certainly not felt anything beyond that. Something similar to if you're wearing dry socks and you walk into like a little bit of water on the floor or something similar to that. Certainly this boot wasn't really defeating me in terms of wearing this boot wasn't making my feet a barrier in terms of the temperature of my feet for my ride. That being said, I certainly wouldn't want to be walking this boot through a stream, which from personal experience, I know that I can do if I'm using the 304. The 146 has slightly less insulation around the cuff, which actually adds to its usability as a more aggressive shoe. And by aggressive, I kind of mean like your ability to ride it hard with slightly less impact. When I bring my toe away from a wall and start to bring my knee forward, the distance that I can get away from the wall in the 146 compared to the 304 is slightly further. It's about 1.5 centimeters of difference. And it might not seem like much, but when you're cycling every revolution over the course of 2 or 3 hours, it's gonna start to add up. So your knee and your hip, if you're riding hard, is gonna be happier in the 146. The last of the 304 is built on Lake's Winterlast, which is a slightly more voluminous in terms of height at the toe box last than the 146 had, which is their Sport Last. The Sport Last has got slightly wider at the forefoot, I feel, and in terms of both of these are classified as a size wide 43 boot. The insole, which is an indicator really of how wide the last actually is at a relevant point. I found the insole in a 146 boot in a size 43 to be approximately 95 millimeters across. And you can see on the 43 wide, there's definitely less width on the actual sole of the shoe. That being said, the upper does provide more volume. Approximately the 304 insole is about 6 millimeters narrower. The reason that doesn't necessarily matter so much is because the upper on the 304 is leather. So if you think of this as the sole of a shoe, when they put a microfiber upper on the sole of a shoe, it sort of, they stretch it on and it comes back slightly. When they put a leather upper on a sole, it stretches back that little bit more and it also gives slightly more. So the fact that the sole itself is slightly narrower on the 304, I wouldn't say impacts me that much. Certainly when I put my foot inside of the 304 compared to the 146, I don't necessarily feel I'm wearing something that's narrower. And also just by another means of comparison, if we look at the insoles themselves, the 146 insole is got that foily insole material on the top, but then the 304, it's got this kind of full layered foily insulating material like the whole way through the insole. So this insole certainly feels like warmer in my hands like almost instantly. But when you begin to put the shoes on, the differences are more and more clear. Now there's definitely a difference into the how you want to put these boots on. Putting on the 146 is a little bit more simple. There's a nice handy strap right at the back where it's easy just to grab on both boots. So putting your boot on, you always want to bang your heel back towards the back of the boot. It just means that your heel goes in for a more secure feeling and fit. You do just want to slightly pull the laces in here as you start to tighten down. It just means that the BOA tightens down at the forefoot a little bit more as you tighten up. Otherwise, because there's so much volume inside these boots, your foot just feels like it washes around. The 304 is slightly different. With the tab at the back, because of the way that this tongue sits in the boot, I feel for a start it's easier to get my foot inside the 304. Banging it back just the same, first of all, you want to be really pulling the laces. Pull the laces, pull the laces, pull the laces. There's just more and more to do in order to get this foot. I find when I get just above where the cuff starts, pulling the lace up and strapping this tab in first gives me the most secure feeling. If you don't follow that step, your toes just don't get any sort of pull on them. Still, when you're using this boa, it tightens up the cuff and the ankle way more than the forefoot does. Keeping your heel towards the back, I feel I've got a nice secure feeling around my toes. It's nothing that's going to be compressing them in any way. And then putting this final tab in the side here before I tighten down. Now, using this tab and Velcro system, it just means that the water deflection of this kind of like tongue cover is slightly more secure. There's just more holding it down. Now the shoes are on again for the same fit, wriggling my toes, I feel that there's just that bit more volume in MXZ304. So whereas I'm wearing summer socks in this left 146, I'm beginning to feel like I probably wouldn't really want to wear that big of socks in this size 43. From a cleat positioning point of view, I don't really want to go any bigger than one full size bigger than my normal pair of cycling shoes, so I can't get away with a 44 if my normal size is 42, which it is. I'm much more happy wearing this 43. Whereas in this 304, this same summer sock that I've got on feels like it's a little bit too small, and I feel like there's just a little bit too much room in this boot by itself. Now, there's a knock-on implication here. Because these shoes are longer than normal, the cleat position on the sole is the next thing to consider. The reason for that is because of this lining inside the boot. You have to remember it's going to be longer, so the implication is where your foot is over the pedal stroke. Now the 304, the sole, is ever so slightly different. Now I'm placing these boots on this Ergon kind of cleat alignment tool that I use in a Fit Studio sometimes. And it's clear to see that the heel position on the 146 is slightly further forward, which means you'll get slightly more over to the top of the pedal on the 146. The toe position on the 146 is just creeping ever so slightly further forward. In reality, it's a very small difference, but the 146 is going to potentially edge ahead in terms of ergonomics and foot position when you're riding. So it's important to kind of keep in mind when you're selecting what the boot really is going to be used for. Now, coming back to usability, the 304 has just got slightly more to it. There are more lugs on the 304 than there are on the 146. Both of them, they're quite equally deep. Like, it's not like you can't use the MX146 in any way to walk around whatsoever. The 304 is the sort of boot that I would recommend you buy if you see yourself taking your bike up the local hills and doing a little bit of hike-a-bike at the same time all winter long. I would say, so if you do foresee yourself doing that, the MX146, you might be pushing its limit. Now, that's not me saying it's a bad boot and you shouldn't buy it. All I'm saying is if you're gonna be doing walking, extra cold, a bit of ice, need a bit more grip, you can see from the structure of the shoes themselves, the 304 is gonna stand up to that test slightly better than the 146. In terms of hardness and durability of the rubber, it's clear to see really that the rubber hardness is about the same left to right. So I don't see a problem with respect to the rubber itself wearing away through use, one boot relative to the other. I mean, there is more surface area and there is more like sole coverage on the 304, so there's maybe an argument to be made that the 304 might last a bit longer, but you can certainly see there's going to be more traction. But in terms of like wear, both equivalent, not really going to be much difference there. Now, by means of comparison with respect to like ventilation and the ability for water to get out and therefore water to get in, you can see that the MX146 gives way after about 40 seconds or so of like fog machine. Now, this test isn't exactly that scientific, but it just serves as more of a means of just representing how much air is getting out of the shoe so that you can see potentially how much water might well get into it. The 146 gives way sooner than the 304. You might not be able to notice, but I keep blowing away the smoke coming out of the top of the 304 through my hand, because due to that second strap, there's just far less ability for water to get in. It just goes to show how much more effective the 304 tongue system is with that double strap at keeping water out of going into the top of the boot. And also just keeping that hot air trapped inside the boot to keep your feet nice and warm. And then more just for reference, a relatively well ventilated CX333 shoe, also by Lake. You can see between 10 to 15 seconds, there's the beginnings of some smoke coming out the shoe, and then after 20, it's pouring out the bottom through the bottom of the insole. Showing you the difference between, yes, both of these shoes, and then what it would be like in a well ventilated summer shoe. Visibility. You can see the chevrons at the front of these shoes, providing a good amount of visibility. So from the front, they're quite similar. The 304, however, has 3 of these chevrons at the back, and the 146 only has a single dot. The downside on the back is, yes, I would say on argument it's slightly less visible, but I wouldn't necessarily say the shoe is hard to see in the dark. And if you're relying on your shoes in low light conditions, then you're really not bright enough in other areas of your bike. But one area that the 146 is certainly a little bit further ahead in terms of visibility is the side. You can see that there's this reflectivity on the side of the 146 that you can't see on the 304. I know customers that have given these 304 boots a hammering for multiple winters and had no negative. Once these boots are cleaned up, you'd have a hard time telling that they've been properly used. Obviously there's a cleat on them. At the same time, the 146, if you look after these boots, they do last you. If you're anything like me, you don't use these boots all the time either. Like, I'll ride my road shoes with spats overshoes quite a lot, or like really deep winter overshoes quite frequently to try and avoid using a winter boot. But when it gets really cold and really wet, the 146 for the sort of riding that I do, road riding, chain gangs in hard, wet conditions, certainly knocks it out the park in terms of warmth and performance and comfort. The 304 for hike a bike, properly off-roading, extremely cold, wet conditions, the 304 has to be fully covered. And so until next time, enjoy cycling and hopefully you don't get cold feet on your next bike ride, because you've got yourself a nice pair of Lake winter boots from edinburghbikefitting.com, our website. Check it out, it's in the description below. Thanks very much for watching.